Hello and welcome back to the Oxbridge Formula. Today we're here with Nicola, who's a biomedical scientist at Oxford.
College twice a week, and we're going to have practicals maybe like 5 times a term.
Okay, what college are you at, just so the viewers know?
Oh, I'm at St. Hugh's College.
Okay, cool. So yeah, I guess it is one of the more far out colleges.
Yeah, by Oxford standards, it's definitely further away than the others.
Yeah. What do you like about St. Hugh's though? Like what made you pick it?
Oh, actually, I was pulled into St. Hugh's, so I actually had no
Okay.
idea what St. Hugh's was until I actually got my offer, and I was like, oh, what's the St. Hugh's about? And I was really nervous at first. So I never visited it before. I'd never heard of it before, but actually, it's now. I love it. I love it at St. Hugh's. It's my definitely my favorite college. We've got these beautiful grounds, and I don't think people talk about them enough. I love the garden. You can walk on the grass, which is a big deal in Oxford. In most places, you can't. And we've got two cats that are basically almost like they're basically like student support almost. I've had them like just like roaming around accommodation. In the evening they'll sort of come in, say hi, and they might like spend some time in the students' rooms. It's just really nice. Yeah, it's very
That's so
relaxed.
nice. It's like constant welfare, like throughout the entirety of your degree.
Yeah.
Ideal.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
you said you have lectures like daily, mostly daily. Can you
Mhm.
give me an example of a lecture you've had recently?
A lecture that we've had recently. Well, we've been online for the past term, so we've had fewer lectures than we would normally have.
Okay.
But definitely one of the main series that we had was on the renal system and the gastrointestinal system, and we also had a bit on basically the genetic factors behind behavior and especially certain disorders like we talked a bit about depression and a few other types of disorders. We talked about a lot of different things. I've just finished my collections, so everything's sort of like merging together in terms of what we did term by term. But yeah, those we did recently.
Oh yeah, that sounds intense. So for anyone who doesn't know, collections are like mock exams that they make Oxford students sit. So yeah, like congratulations for finishing them. What part did you find the hardest?
Um, I think there was no like particular part that I necessarily found the hardest, but it's just
Okay.
the workload overall. It's just that there's so much material to cover. Actually, one of the tips that I got from someone else in biomed, someone in an older year, was that I should really pretty much be aiming to focus on 50% of the material really, and then just know that like in detail, because they're not just expecting. It's not like a high school syllabus where you just they give you the syllabus and you know that. In order to get a first in an essay, you don't just have to know the stuff in the lectures, even though that's important. You also have to go beyond that and like add your own original thoughts and hopefully your own research as well. So 50% of the actual course I did that, and the other 50% was just you do the bare minimum, and that was something that I really had to get used to because I'm normally used to just doing stuff where I just like go 110% on everything. And that was like one of the hardest things was just knowing when to reel in and really focus. Yeah.
Yeah, I definitely agree. It's similar with biochem. There's just so much content that there's no way that you could learn that much stuff.
Mm,
So you do have to be very particular with what you pick. But also then again, that's so tricky to like what if you didn't learn something that was like the majority of the questions on the paper? It's such a tricky game. But yeah,
mm.
but it isn't physically possible to learn everything. So you are right, you have to pick specific things. So what sort of things were in your 50% of topics you sort of learned?
Oh, I did, well, one of my favorite parts of the course is neuroscience. So I really like covered all the neuroscience modules, especially we have a lot of overlap with experimental psychology actually.
Wow.
And yeah, I enjoyed those modules as well. In fact, I was able to like talk to my friends from experimental psychology, and like just by talking with them I was able to revise that part in a lot more detail than is originally covered by the biomed course. So that was great. From like we're divided in like multiple modules. So we've got like body and cells, brain and behavior, and genes and molecules, as well as a statistics part. The statistics is mandatory, unfortunately. But from genes and molecules, I mean, I've just finished my collection, so I've just sort of.
For more information on Oxbridge colleges, subjects, and to get help with the application process, visit oxbridgeformula.co.uk. Click subscribe and ring the notification icon to be notified when we release new content.
Like almost wiped this out from my brain.
I don't blame
but
you.
I chose 50%, and then I focused on it really. But one thing that I would advise people who are taking biomed to do is to not focus too much on the physics and chemistry modules, because even though those are part of the course, you're really only going to be tested on them in the multiple choice. So it's just knowing what's actually going to be covered in the essay part, because that's going to be where you're going to be really getting your marks. So just being strategic that way.
Yeah, that's clever. That's clever. Because we had in one of our papers, our like molecular cell biology paper is more of our essay paper from first year, and so there were 3 essays and then multiple choice questions. So like you said, it's really important to concentrate on the essays because that's the big bulk of the marks. Can you think of any like example essays you've written? Like maybe some of your collection essay titles, maybe.
I mean, actually, I've got my collection titles.
Oh yeah,
because
perfect.
they're online. I'll read out the exact questions
That would be dreamy.
that I answered. So one of them was describe the mechanism of gastric acid secretion. How can drugs be used to raise the pH of gastric juice? The other one was, I did 6 essays. The second one was describe the cellular mechanisms responsible for the generation of the resting membrane potential. And then another one was, what is the difference between monoclonal and polyclonal antibodies? How are these reagents generated and how can they be used as analytical tools to investigate biological processes? Do you want me to go through like the rest of them?
I mean, yeah, if you want to. Have you got like any favorite questions? Any ones that you found really like were the favorite ones to write, or maybe more tricky ones to write?
Okay. Yeah, actually, the one on the monoclonal and polyclonal antibodies was one of the most interesting ones.
How come?
Mainly because I was able to add a lot of stuff relating to COVID because I just did like a bit of outside reading, and there's a lot of basically monoclonal and polyclonal antibodies have both been used in things like testing, for instance, for like testing whether you do have antibodies against COVID, and also in terms of potential ways to treat COVID as well. So I was able to integrate that into my essay, and that was really interesting. That was really fun, actually.
Yeah, that's really cool. And I guess it shows that you've been reading around the subject and you've been keeping up to date with scientific research, which is exactly what they want to see. So yeah, that's amazing. Is there any that you found like particularly difficult to answer? Or any questions on the list that you would never answer in a million years?
Questions I wouldn't answer would be on auditory neuroscience. Actually, that's one of the things that I separated. So I focused on visual neuroscience, and I sort of only did like the bare minimum of auditory neuroscience, simply because it's something that I'm not as interested in. And also, like if you're not as interested in it, I guess you're less motivated to like read around the subject and really focus on it as an essay topic as well.
Yeah, definitely.
So yeah, that was like one of the decisions I made. Another question that I did answer for these collections that I didn't enjoy so much was one on gluconeogenesis.
Metabolism.
Yeah, it's just memorizing all the enzymes really, and it's just like putting it all down, doing the diagrams. Like, I mean, metabolism is great, but it's not one of my special interests. So that was a more difficult one.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, metabolism is actually one of my favorite things, and I actually like that like you just learn the process that it happens, and I think because it is a process, like it's easier to learn than just random facts. But yeah, I totally understand that it is quite intense. And also from what I've been hearing, it sounds like you do a mix of everything. Like you dip into biochem, you dip into experimental psychology, you dip into like medicine and a range of things.
Yeah, we like when we were at uni, like not doing remote learning, when we were going to lectures together, like we had lectures with the med students, we had lectures with the experimental psychology students, the chemistry students. We even, like, did we have physics students at one point? I don't really remember, but yeah,
Oh.
we were literally just, yeah, like basically we get to meet people from a lot of different courses because of our subject.
And do you like the breadth of the subject? Like, or do you ever think, oh, I should have just done EP because experimental psychology because that's the area that I prefer? Or do you like being able to have those options?
Oh yeah, no, I definitely yeah, I definitely enjoy the broadness of the
Mm.
course. So I was considering experimental psychology actually, um, when I was applying, but one of the reasons why I chose biomedical sciences instead is because you do have the option to graduate with a neuroscience degree, which is like fantastic. So you just have to wait
Wow.
until second year to specialize, and then you can start heading in that direction. So, you know, you've got a bit of flexibility there. And another thing is that I also have an interest in immunology. So one of the things that you can't really cover in experimental psychology is that you can't really go into detail in immunology. But you know, in biomed, you can actually take, like, in your final year, say like a neuroscience option and an immunology option. So it's just great having that sort of variety as well.
Yeah, definitely. I think what's really rare about biomedical sciences, and I was looking actually up at the course before the interview, is that
Mm.
you have choice, which is quite rare for an Oxford science degree. So biochem has no choice at all. You do all the modules until fourth year where you get to pick which lab you go into. That's basically all the choice you get. Whereas you guys, you actually pick modules. It's not even like you just get to pick what you learn for the exam, but you can direct your whole degree.
Yeah, like first year is really the only time when you have to when you don't really have that much choice except for, you know, like which 50% you decide to focus
Yeah.
on. But yeah, like it was a huge deal earlier on, like a couple of months ago when we were choosing our options for next year. It's great. It's like pretty much how you would get in a lot of universities where, you know, different modules have different like amount, like numbers, a different number of credits, sorry. And you have to get like a certain number of credits. You know, it's the same with your practicals as well. Your practicals don't necessarily need to match up with your modules. Yeah, it's great. I love the flexibility of the course. It's one of my favorite aspects of it.
Yeah, I think that's great because there's always going to be modules within the subject, even if you love the subject. Yeah, there are going to be modules that you're like, oh, I would rather do anything but this. And so to have the choice to sort of leave that behind is, I think that's really, really
Yeah,
great.
yeah.
So is that one of the main reasons that you picked biomed? Can you talk to me a little bit more about why you picked that course?
Yeah, I mean, I went through a bit of a journey, like application wise, and understanding which sort of course I wanted to take. Um,
Walk
I
us through
was
that.
originally, yeah, I mean, I was originally going to go to like down the medicine route, but then again, it's like a really big responsibility to like go on. And got some really good advice from someone, which is like, if you're not 110% sure that you want to go into medicine, then don't take medicine because it's a huge responsibility.
Yeah.
um, but at the same time, I love, you know, I love the research behind medicine. I love like like human biology specifically. I didn't want to take biology, even though I consider that, because I wasn't too interested in, like, you know, plants and fungi and so on. I wasn't that specialized in like biochemistry, even though I also consider that. Love neuroscience, but, you know, psychology, maybe not. I did apply for a couple of neuroscience courses specifically on my UCAS.
Okay.
Um, but yeah, no, biomed just really appealed to me because it's 3 years, so it's not as much of a responsibility
Yeah.
as medicine. It is intense, perhaps not quite as intense. You don't need to worry about, you know, patients and that sort of thing, which for me is a bit of a plus. And
Yeah.
also, like, at the end, you have quite a few options. So, say, like, I did end up deciding that I want to go into medicine, I can take an accelerated medicine course. Um, so that's still an option for me, definitely. I could go into like pharmaceuticals. I could like go into like a lab. That's really what biomed is for. You know, there's just like a whole lot of stuff that you can go into. And again, the flexibility, at the same time, I'm able to like specialize in something that I really am interested in, which is fantastic.
Yeah, I think that's really, really good. And yeah, and like you said, there's so many options after your degree. And I know you listed some then, but do you have like a particular career aspiration in mind at the moment?
Yeah, I think I'm pretty firm on being like wanting to become a neuroscientist
Okay.
specifically. There are different ways I can go about that. I could take an accelerated medicine course, but then rather than becoming sort of like a clinician, I would just be a researcher with a doctor's like who's a doctor, like, and I've heard that that medicine degree as a researcher, if you want to go into clinical research specifically, can be very useful, in
Yeah.
particular in regards to like clinical trials, getting patients to sign up, that sort of thing. The alternative would be a PhD, like obviously like a DPhil, and that's I think a more standard way of going about getting into research. Um, so you can go straight from undergrad to PhD. You can go like do a master's degree in between in something that you're interested in. That's only like a 1 year commitment generally. Um, there is another type of degree. It's called like a MD PhD degree, I believe, and it's basically a doctor's degree, but it's basically like a joint doctor's PhD degree. But those are very, very rare and they're very, very
Yeah.
competitive. And only a few countries offer them, including, I think, Australia, Canada, USA, they have them. So I suppose like that would be a really ideal option. But then those, I think, are like 9 years in terms of yeah,
What,
so
9 years after your undergraduate? Wow.
essentially, yeah, they're generally like maybe like 8 years long, 9 years long, because it's basically a combined doctor's degree with a PhD.
Yeah.
But the benefit with that is that you're like really specialized. You're a researcher, but you also have the benefits of like a medical, like you understand what goes on in terms of like the actual like medical aspect as well. So those are the three main options, I suppose.
Yeah, no, that sounds really, really interesting. And I always just think of like for biochem, especially like the options being you go to a lab or you do something else. But I suppose there's so many options within the lab research choice. Like you said, there's so many different things you can go into, and I think like it is a great option and it is such a broad option. And I think people like sometimes say, oh, what's the point in doing biomedical science when you could just do
Mm,
medicine? And like there is so much reason to do biomedical science. If you don't want to be a
mm,
doctor, but you're so interested behind the science of
mm.
medicine, then it's the perfect option. And like you said, you can do a fast track um, medicine, become a doctor,
Yeah.
a clinician. Yeah, so I think it is great. There are so many different routes.
Mm,
So obviously that's going to take a lot of applications and things like that. But I'd like to talk a bit about your application process to Oxford
yeah.
for biomed. So I suppose the first step in the whole journey is like picking a course, and we've already talked a little bit about that. But did you ever consider natural sciences at Cambridge, because you can do
Mm.
neuroscience modules within that, and it is quite broad, just like biomed?
Yeah, I was considering natural sciences. However, like, I mean, first of all, just looking at the Oxford Biomed course, I just knew almost immediately after I was like going through it, like the more I looked into it, the more appealing I found it. I was just like, that's really it. With
Okay.
natural sciences, what kind of put me off a bit was the fact that, first of all, it is so broad. Secondly, I was worried about, how am I going to be able to refine my application for this course when I know that I'm also going up against people who are like, maybe more physics based, chemistry based, how am I going to make myself stand out? Like with biomed, I know how to do that, but when it comes to something so broad, I was a little bit more confused.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah. And then also because I'm so neuroscience focused, I was a lot more familiar with stuff that was going on at Oxford and at the time in terms of, the neuroscience research. And just from like my general reading, I definitely heard more from like the Oxford side of things and the Cambridge side of things. So I was like, I'm pretty sure Oxford probably has a bigger presence in the neuroscience field. So that's really what guided my choice in the end.
Yeah, I think that's really, really fair. And like you said, if you do want to go into research and things like that, it's good to see which uni does the most research into this. And also, the people who are doing this research at the universities are going to be the people lecturing you. So if they're
Mm.
doing amazing research and these amazing discoveries, you're going to be the first ones to hear about it, and it
Yeah.
probably could even come up in your lectures. So yeah, I think that's really a good way to choose between the two. Um, and then I suppose you've got personal statement writing. So like you said, you felt like you could prove to Oxford that you were really passionate about biomed, whereas it would have been harder if it was a broader course and things. So what sort
Mhm.
of things did you do for your personal statement, and how did you demonstrate your passion?
Well, I'm trying to remember since it was a long time ago
Yeah,
now.
to be fair.
Yeah, I remember I went through so many drafts of this. I was trying to make it as concise as possible, fitting in as much things as possible.
Yeah.
I can try and like recall what it was like broadly. I remember I did an internship at a neuroscience laboratory, and that featured prominently in it. But I also brought up a book I read by Oliver Sacks. Not his like the man who mistook his wife for a hat.
Oh, that's what I was thinking
I read
of.
that like a while ago, but I was specifically
Yeah.
talking about his final book, River of Consciousness, because he talks a lot about like the nature of research and that. So I found that interesting. I talked about because I actually studied anthropology at high school, which was very unusual.
Wow. Yeah.
Yeah, so um, I managed to integrate that because one of the things that we covered was um, basically how culture can impact the symptoms of like psychiatric disorders. So I'd put like a little line in there. Um, Another thing I talked about was stuff I'd done for fundraising. So there was a charity concert I was involved in that raised money for women in STEM. So basically, coding classes, like free coding classes for disadvantaged girls. And I also talked about, yeah, I also did like a similar thing with art. So I made art for charity as well. And I also talked to this might sound a bit strange, but I talked about this time I went to Morocco. Like this is at the very end, sort of wrap things up.
Yeah.
So about this time I went to Morocco, and I was like talking with some of like the local families. Um, and one of the things that really struck me about that experience was the fact that so many girls didn't have the opportunity to, you know, go to school. Like maybe they, like a lot of the time they would have arranged marriages, you know, they would just basically stay at home. They wouldn't have the opportunity to get higher education. So I basically finished with the fact that, you know, it's not just an interest, it's almost like a responsibility because I'm one of the few people who does get that um, opportunity and I need to take it. So I think that was the broad message of it.
That's really, really nice. And I think it like demonstrates a huge variety of passion for science, but passion for education and things. And I think that's what Oxford really want to see. And you talked a bit about women in STEM. How does it feel to be a woman in STEM? How has it been for you?
Mm, I remember like when I was first starting to get interested in science, didn't realize how large of a gender disparity there was. So it was only later on when adults started to point out to me like, oh, you know, like all of your science teachers are male, like doesn't that affect you in any way? And I hadn't realized that up until that point. And then I started to see more and more about it. I think Biomed actually is female, mostly female, funnily enough, which is great.
It's good.
But I think definitely for certain fields like computer science,
Mm.
engineering, mathematics, it is still very male dominated. Uh, it's difficult. I think sometimes if you are a girl, sometimes people have preconceived notions about what you are capable of. But I think if you sort of just like ignore that and you keep on going and like doing like your absolute best really, and just you're just confident and self-assured in what you can achieve, I found that you're able to um, sort of like overcome those opinions very easily, if that makes sense.
No, definitely. I feel like we are the change, you know, like it's up to us to be examples to other girls, because, you know, if you haven't got any examples to look up to, you do just think it's impossible. So yeah, I think we do carry that responsibility of encouraging others to go into STEM as a degree and hopefully beyond. So yeah, definitely. And what's your top tip for writing a personal statement? For Oxford especially, I suppose.
I think focus on your passion and your leadership. I think those are two, like your passion, your leadership, your initiative, really.
Okay.
That's definitely one thing that I've seen as sort of a common theme that isn't talked about so much in personal statements. But just talking to other people, like my classmates and so on, they all have a prior experience where they did take initiative with a project. They started a project, they led a project, they did this, they did that, basically showing that they weren't just sort of like riding on with life, they were actually trying to initiate change at some point. I think that's really important.
Yeah, because I think that's what Oxford does as an institution. Like, they are such change makers, and I suppose they are trying to rear the next generation of change makers. And you have to have that initiative to come up with these ideas for research and for things like that. So yeah, I think that's really, really important to demonstrate. And yeah, the passion is so important. Oxford can tell straight through you if you're not genuinely passionate about it. So yeah, having genuine passion is so, so important. And then I suppose after that you had to sit the BMAT.
Yeah, the BMAT. We're the only biomedical sciences course in all of the UK that requires the BMAT.
It's so sad.
It's really not that bad. I mean, like it took a lot of it did take a lot of preparation. I prepared a little bit later than I think is perhaps recommended. Like perhaps I think I would prepare like a month in advance. There are certain websites online that do a really good BMAT preparation course that I had no idea about. I just got like a secondhand book from like an old med student. I was like trying to like go off that. But there are definitely some very well tailored online courses that I would highly recommend.
Yeah, that's also a great time to just mention the Oxbridge formula, because they do a BMAT course online, so that's ideal. And yeah, it's like a really affordable one, because some companies will charge like astronomical prices, but the great thing about the Oxbridge formula is they do these great courses at an affordable price, and they go through past paper questions with working and explain the best ways to approach them. So yeah, so it's great that you've brought that up and that you think that would have helped, because I think a lot of people have benefited a lot from that course. So yeah, that's really interesting.
It's definitely like I think just having like past paper questions on topics that you know you're weaker on. Like for instance, I hadn't done physics in about 2 years. Like by the time I did BMAT, and there are some physics questions on there and chemistry questions too. And those are definitely things, like those were definitely like two main things that I had to brush up on beforehand. To be honest, I got my BMAT score later, and I did pretty much average. Like I wasn't like spectacular in any way, shape, or form. But I think my GCSEs pulled me through, as well as my personal statement. I think one thing that people have to realize is that just because it's Oxford doesn't mean that you're not allowed to, be average every once in a while.
Do you have, so you said you obviously didn't do chemistry, physics, you weren't as brushed up on those subjects, so how did you brush up on those? Did you use like A-level textbooks, or what sort of things did you do?
I brought out like my old IGCSE book, and I was like, whoa, what's happening? Brushed up on the formulas, especially. I did flashcards, all that sort of thing. One thing that I would highly recommend though is not to, like I was revising like almost right up to the minute of the exam, but I think that is like, I wouldn't recommend that actually in retrospect, because I think if I could like go back, I would have spent a day not thinking about it, because with the essays especially, you need to have like a clear head. It can't just be like clogged up with stuff that you still have the forefront of your mind from your revision.
Yeah, that's a really good tip.
Yeah.
Yeah. And what about the time constraints? Because I know that you have to answer quite a lot in, I think it's quite a short amount of time considering what you have to answer, right? So how did you find that?
Oh no, the essays were like very, like, time wise, like, obviously it's a bit challenging. You can't sort of freeze, but then again, with any sort of exam, you can't freeze either.
Yeah.
But especially with the BMAT, you've got to just like get on it immediately and give it like 100% all the way up to the end. Um,
And is
yeah.
there like any way that you practice doing that for the BMAT? Because I suppose if people have done, I mean, I suppose they'll have done GCSEs, but for the last year, if they're doing like physics, maths, chemistry, they won't have written essays for a while. Or obviously, if you're doing
Mm.
BMAT, you probably would have done biology too. But there isn't a lot of essay writing in there. So how did you prepare for that?
Well, I did IB, so I had like a lot of essay writing already just for my other subjects.
Oh, I see.
Um,
Okay.
yeah, so I didn't do A level, but definitely I'd say just practice, practice, practice. Um, yeah, I mean, I was very caught up with, like my actual school course, and that's why I left it to about a month in advance to start preparing.
Mm.
Um, I think like if you start like 3 months in advance, you're more than prepared. Like you'll be fine. Like just you'll be completely fine. Just keep on doing practice. Like just keep on doing practices. And again, with the online courses, because they actually tailor things to like stuff that you're weaker at, like then you're absolutely set. You're fine.
That's really, really great advice. And I suppose it is just knowing when is best to start preparing. So
Mm.
yeah, so 3 months before is like ample preparation time, I guess. So
Yeah.
that's really, really
more
good.
more than it's like perfect.
Chill out. Okay. After your admissions tests, it's obviously the next step in the process is interviews, which I think a lot of people get nervous for. I know that was the most scary bit for my my admissions process, because all the other unis for biochemistry didn't have interviews. It was just Oxford, and I think Oxford interviews are very different to other university interviews. So what was your interview experience like?
Oh, I mean, I interviewed at Trinity College and Teddy Hall,
Okay, yeah.
but I was based at Trinity, and it was actually surprisingly relaxing. They had a table just covered in cookies, and they were playing Brooklyn Nine-Nine, just like a marathon of Brooklyn Nine-Nine on TV in the JCR, and we were just chilling. There was a dog, like it was, it was like as
Oh,
things go.
nice.
Like Teddy Hall had a coffee machine as well, and just I think they did their very best to make things relaxing. And one thing that really threw me off my first interview actually was just how relaxed it was.
Mm.
Lightning.
No.
Like, um, yeah, like
Wow.
that's pretty intense. Yeah, no, I got into like this interview room, and like the guy was like my interviewer was just lounging on a sofa and just being like completely relaxed. Like the other two interviewers were just on their couches. I did one of my interviews like on one of those like rocking chairs.
No
And
way.
I was actually like, yeah, that was at Teddy Hall. I was just on a rocking chair, and I was like, how am I meant to look professional?
And with the anxiety of the interviews, just rocking back and forth.
And they were in normal chairs. Like I don't know, I don't know, was it a test?
Yeah, maybe it was a test.
No, no, it's actually they do their very, very, very best to make things relaxed. I do understand that people get very, very nervous. I actually have a friend who, like straight up, like she went to the bathroom and like had to throw up before an interview because she was
Oh,
so nervous. But she got in, like so
have you got any
I'd
example
say it's
questions?
example questions.
Yeah, that you were asked in the interview.
I remember very distinctly an interviewer, I think it was my last interview. One of them just like talked to me and was like, "Oh yeah, so how would you calculate the volume of blood in my body?" And I
Oh,
was like, "Okay."
so how did you
um,
go
I
about
need a bit.
explaining that to the tutor?
Oh, I mean, this is really embarrassing. I don't fully remember the solution, but I remember I was just like, okay, because you don't want to be silent. You want to actually um, Oh, I've got another interview story after this.
Oh, perfect.
But basically, just like say everything that comes to your head, because I was just like saying anything. I was like, oh, like would a dialysis machine work? But no. But then how would you do this? How would you do that? And then I think, yeah, eventually I got to it. It was something to do with like injecting like radioactive stuff. I genuinely like I clumsily got there. It happened in the end. That
Did
was
the
okay.
tutors like give you hints as you were going along?
Oh yeah, yeah. They would sort of like give like a expression like close. It's like, no, you're getting there, you know.
And encouraging, like,
And just like, no, you might want to go back to the previous idea. But yeah, I got there in the end.
that's great.
A few questions on the kidney. I hate the kidney, but I answered them anyway. But the one I did want to tell you about was this one question on, I think, multiple sclerosis.
Okay.
And they were saying like, oh, so why is the prevalence of multiple sclerosis different in these two different countries? And I was just rattling off like a million different things. Just like kept on going. One of the things I said was sunlight, because the two countries in question had very different climates.
Okay.
And for some reason the tutor looked very impressed with that, and I was like, sunlight? I have no idea how that would contribute to multiple sclerosis, but okay. And then eventually I got to the very obvious answer, which was genetics. Went through everything else, finally got to genetics. But yeah, like afterwards, I was still confused at why the tutor was so happy with that. And I actually looked at it, looked up online. There had recently been a study that had shown a connection with multiple sclerosis and sunlight. And I was like, oh, so I just randomly stumbled across that. So I think like definitely just say anything that comes to your mind, even if you're not sure like how it would work. Just like spill it out, and who knows, you might stumble across something like that.
Yeah, I think that's honestly the best tip, because I was told before my interview to just speak out loud, so I did. And I thought like all the thought processes that were going on in here, no matter how embarrassing they were, because they were so embarrassing at times, I just said them, because it's so much better for the tutors to see what's going on in your head. And like you said, you can say something that you think is so stupid but could be like actually so relevant. So yeah, I definitely agree with that. And that's a really, really interesting story, no way.
Yeah.
And it's nice that the interviewers were sort of quite chill with you and things like that.
Yeah.
Yeah, have you got any other like interview stories or tips?
Interview stories, tips. I'm actually not sure I do. Like I just remember how relaxed they were. I'd say like try and calm yourself down as much as possible. I remember some people like had their books out and were revising on the day. Oh yeah, that is something I would say though. Like beforehand, I was trying to try and make myself as impressive as possible, know things that were really, obscure related to my field. None of that came up in the interview. One thing that would definitely come up is stuff that you've done in your high school biology course. For instance, like if you're doing biomed, like just know your high school stuff, like your normal stuff, very well. And that's really the only knowledge that you need in order to be able to like get through the questions. And you're just guessing, I guess.
Yeah, no, I definitely agree, because it is just building on what you know, and they will just keep building and building and building until you don't know anymore. And at that point they want to see how you cope with that and how you tackle the problem at a point where you don't really know the answer anymore. And they don't want you to get the right answer. They don't care if you don't, but they want to see how you work, how your mind thinks. So yeah, I think that was a really good tip. And also learn everything you say in your personal statement. Make sure you can talk about it, because you could get caught out. I know a lot of tutors maybe will mention something on your personal statement to discuss with you to calm you down initially, because it's something you're more familiar with, so you can just talk away. So yeah, be prepared for that as well, I guess.
Oh, I got a story about that though. In one of my interviews, about the anthropology thing, they asked about the anthropology, like the specific disorder that I brought up. And the only problem was with this specific psychiatric disorder, I swear there are only 2 papers published on it, because it's so rare. It's so damn rare. So, I'm sorry, I don't know whether I'm allowed to say that.
No, it's fine.
It's so rare. And then apparently, this is complete coincidence. He had he was involved in a charity that was like to do with these sorts of psychiatric disorders. So he was really interested. He was asking like for all these details, and I was like, I mean, there are only 2 papers on this. What am I meant to say? Like I'd done the research. So yeah, I guess yeah, definitely know your personal statement inside out.
Yeah, that's yeah. I mean, yeah, and I suppose maybe pick things on your personal statement that there's more than 2 papers about. I mean, 2 papers is
Yeah,
fine, but like if you can, like help yourself here and like do something that's a bit more
yeah. Choose an
popular.
easier example that you
Yeah.
can actually depend on.
And then, like you said, biomedical science has labs as well. And you said that you can sort of tailor your labs and you don't have to do labs that are directly related to your modules and things like that. So can you talk me a little bit more through your first year labs?
Don't feel a lot of pressure with labs. You're generally paired up with at least one other person. So there isn't like, you're not expected to be an expert in everything. You're basically given a booklet at the beginning and you have to work through the protocol, fill out all the questions. There might be like, normally there's at least one calculation that you have to do. The great thing is that you get to work with a variety of things. So a variety of equipment. I get the feeling that especially if you didn't have the opportunity to do like proper labs at high school, for whatever reason, it's a great way to sort of to get that experience and become more familiar. I was lucky to have done an internship at a laboratory, but the vast majority of people who take biomed, I think, don't get that. So just like everyone, by the end of it, everyone sort of knows the apparatus.
What sort of equipment was it? Like, what do you use? Got any
Oh, like
examples?
specifically, like in that, like when I was saying that, I was specifically thinking about gel electrophoresis,
Okay, yeah.
which is like used to separate things like DNA. I did a lot of that for my internship. It was basically like, I guess, the lab version of printing out papers, I guess. like like just doing lots and lots of gel electrophoresis. And but like, for instance, the person I was paired up with at the time had never done it before. And most people in that class had never done it before. But then by the end of it, you know what, we all knew it. So it's, I guess, like a great equalizing factor of the course, I guess.
Yeah, that's really, really good. And do you have like write-ups at the end to sort of write up what you've done?
Not write-ups per se, but the questions can definitely be very lengthy.
Okay.
Yeah, we do spend like there definitely is a lot of teamwork involved in getting the questions done, because they will ask you a lot of stuff about a lot of things that you aren't familiar with. So the people who finish earliest are the people who work as a team the best, pretty much.
Yeah, I can imagine that for sure. And then one final question. What's been your favourite lab throughout the entirety of first year?
My favorite lab. Oh wow. Ooh. There was one where we were like basically electrocuting ourselves. Like that sounds really melodramatic, but it's really not that bad. Basically, we hooked up electrodes to ourselves, and we were sort of just like, we basically made, I don't know how to get this on camera. Basically, when we activated the electrode, our like hand would do that.
That's so cool.
That was really cool. Another thing was like when we hooked up electrodes to our heads, and we were able to detect like eye movement. So that was another thing that was like related to visual neuroscience. Oh, and we also had an ECG one, and the person in question had a great time. Like, who was like the volunteer for the ECG had a great time, because all they had to do was just lie down on a inflatable mattress as we, you know, did random things and measured their heart rate. Like,
That's so cool. It sounds like there's quite like a range of labs, and it doesn't sound that boring. Like some labs for us are just like pipetting stuff, and I can get a lot more. And I
Oh yeah,
suppose,
we have a couple of those as well. Don't worry.
yeah, I'm sure. Yeah, I'm sure. Like all the science people have to do that, but it's great that you also get those more like interactive ones as well. So yeah, biomed sounds like a really cool course, and I wish I'd looked a little bit more
Yeah.
into it. Like I love biochemistry, but it does sound good.
Yeah, it's an underrated course for sure. Like people just think it's like a weird version of medicine, you know, like a shortened version of medicine, but it really isn't. It's got its own benefits, I suppose.
Yeah. Well, after watching this interview, they'll know. They'll know what they're missing. So that's great.
Apply for biomed.
Yeah, why wouldn't you after this, honestly? Well, thank you so much for being here, and like it's been really, really interesting to talk to you about your experiences.
Oh, no worries. Yeah, thanks for inviting me. It's been really great. Yeah, I
Oh,
love sharing about this stuff.
oh, thank you so much.
Okay.
Bye.
Well, see you. Bye. Thanks so much.